If you think your neighbors are annoying because they play loud music at 3 a.m., imagine living next door to the Roman Republic. It is 219 BC, and the Mediterranean is technically at peace. But let's be honest, it's the kind of peace where everyone is smiling while hiding a dagger behind their back. To understand why things are about to go horribly, horribly wrong, we have to look at the Barca family. Years ago, Hannibal Barca, a man who hated Rome more than cats hate bath time, made his 9-year-old son, Hannibal, swear a blood oath. Fast forward a few decades, Carthage has been rebuilding its empire in Spain, gathering silver and anger. Rome, meanwhile, is busy dealing with pirates and Gauls, feeling pretty good about themselves. They signed the Ebro Treaty with Carthage, which basically said, hey, see this river? You stay south, we stay north. Don't touch our stuff, we won't touch yours. Simple, right? Wrong. Because sitting distinctively south of that river, deep in Carthaginian territory, was a city called Saguntum. Saguntum was a Greek colony that had managed to wiggle its way into the Roman Cool Kids Alliance. Rome loved having a foothold in Carthage's backyard. It was a diplomatic loophole the size of an elephant. Now, enter Hannibal. He's 26 years old, a tactical genius, and has just taken command of the Carthaginian army in Spain. He looks at Saguntum. He looks at the treaty. He looks at his to-do list, which just says, destroy Rome in all caps. Hannibal knows attacking Saguntum will trigger a war with Rome. But here's the kicker. That's exactly what he wants. He just needs an excuse. And wouldn't you know it, Saguntum decides to start bullying their neighbors, the Torboletae, who just happened to be allies of Carthage. Hannibal didn't see a diplomatic crisis, he saw a golden ticket. It's the spring of 219 BC, and Hannibal Barca has arrived at Saguntum. He didn't come alone, of course. He brought about 150,000 of his closest friends, mostly hardened mercenaries who thought vacation meant stabbing people in a different zip code. Saguntum was not an easy nut to crack. It was perched on a steep, rocky plateau, essentially giving the middle finger to gravity. The inhabitants, seeing the ocean of spears outside their windows, did the sensible thing. They panicked immediately and sent messengers sprinting to Rome faster than a teenager whose parents just pulled into the driveway. Hannibal, being young and impatient, decided he didn't want to wait for a starvation siege. He ordered an immediate assault. The Carthaginians rolled up their vinae and started battering the walls. But the Saguntines were surprisingly scrappy. They rained down stones, arrows, and insults. And then, disaster struck. Or rather, a javelin struck. The great general went down. The Carthaginian army freaked out. For a few weeks, the siege effectively paused, while Hannibal lay in his tent, presumably grumbling about workplace hazards and demanding more grapes. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Saguntine messengers finally arrived, breathless and terrified. They burst into the Senate, screaming that Hannibal was at the gates. Surely, the mighty Roman Republic would mobilize the legions instantly to save their loyal friends? Nope. The Roman Senate, world-renowned for their ability to argue about absolutely nothing for hours, decided that the best course of action was a committee. They voted to send 2 ambassadors, Publius Valerius Flaccus and Baebius Tamphilus, to go have a stern chat with Hannibal. So, while Saguntum was being turned into Swiss cheese, Rome sent 2 guys in togas to file a noise complaint. When the ambassadors finally arrived at the siege lines, Hannibal, now back on his feet and very grumpy, refused to even let them into the camp. He basically told the guards, "Tell them I'm in the shower," and continued the bombardment. With the Roman ambassadors huffing and puffing their way to Carthage to complain to management, Hannibal turned his full, undivided attention back to Saguntum. And by attention, I mean massive battering rams. The siege was now entering its brutal middle phase. Hannibal's wound had healed, and he was eager to make up for lost time. He targeted the city's weakest point, a stretch of wall that looked slightly less invincible than the rest. He deployed the turrets, giant wooden siege towers that were taller than the walls and filled with angry men throwing things. But the Saguntines had a secret weapon, the philarica. This was essentially a heavy spear wrapped in flammable tow and pitch. It was the ancient equivalent of a Molotov cocktail mixed with a javelin. When fired from the walls, it didn't just pierce armor, it set the poor guy wearing it on fire. Despite these fiery countermeasures, the sheer weight of numbers began to tell. Hannibal's rams smashed a breach. 3 towers collapsed. The Carthaginian infantry poured into the gap, thinking victory was theirs. But just as the dust cleared, surprise! The Saguntines had built another wall right behind the first one. The fighting inside the breach was claustrophobic and savage. It wasn't about strategy anymore. It was a mosh pit of death. Hannibal himself was in the thick of it, dodging spears and shouting encouragement. The Saguntines, realizing Rome was leaving them on red, fought with the desperation of people who knew there was no backup plan. As the months dragged on, 6, 7, 8 months' supplies in Saguntum ran out. People started eyeing their leather sandals and wondering if they could be boiled into soup. The city was starving, battered, and alone, but they refused to surrender. Why? Because they still believed the lie that Rome was coming. By the 8th month, Saguntum wasn't really a city anymore. It was a pile of rubble held together by stubbornness and hope. But hope, much like a diet during the holidays, eventually fails. A local Spanish chieftain named Alorcus, who was technically working for Hannibal but pretended to be a neutral third party, entered the city to talk sense into the defenders. He stood before the starving Saguntine Senate and basically said, "Look guys, Rome isn't coming. The only thing coming is a very angry man on an elephant. Just give up the gold, leave the city with the clothes on your back, and Hannibal might not kill everyone." The Saguntine leaders looked at Alorcus. They looked at their city. They looked at their empty pantries. And then they made a decision that was equal parts heroic and unhinged. Instead of surrendering their wealth to Hannibal, they dragged all the city's gold, silver, expensive rugs, and probably their favorite clay pots into the town square. They built a massive mountain of treasure. Then, they lit a match. As the fire roared, sending the GDP of a small nation up in smoke, the Saguntine leaders didn't just watch. Many of them, realizing the game was over, threw themselves into the fire. It was a mass suicide pact fueled by pride and despair. While this horrific barbecue was happening in the square, the city guards abandoned their posts to watch the tragedy. Hannibal, who never missed a beat, saw the walls were undefended. He shouted the ancient Carthaginian equivalent of Leroy Jenkins and ordered a full-scale assault. The final collapse had begun. The city that had held up the greatest general of the age for nearly a year was about to pay the price for Rome's procrastination. When the Carthaginian army finally poured into the streets of Saguntum, they weren't exactly in a mood for mercy. They had spent 8 months sleeping in the mud, eating hardtack, and dodging flaming javelins. They were tired, cranky, and owed a lot of back pay. Hannibal, seeing the Saguntines burning the loot, gave an order that was chillingly simple: kill every adult male. The sack of Saguntum was absolute chaos. Soldiers hunted down the survivors in the burning houses. Those who hadn't committed suicide were cut down where they stood. It was a scene of total devastation, a going out of business sale where the currency was blood and nobody was getting a receipt. However, despite the massive bonfire earlier, not everything was lost. Hannibal, ever the pragmatist, managed to salvage enough plunder to do 3 very important things: pay his grumbling mercenaries, send a bunch of cool stuff back to Carthage to show his family he was doing a good job, and keep a rainy day fund for his upcoming Italian road trip. The city of Saguntum, a loyal friend of Rome, was effectively deleted from the map. The population was either dead or sold into slavery. It was a brutal message sent via express mail to the Roman Senate. Your protection means nothing. Hannibal had crossed the line. He had poked the bear, slapped the bear, and then set the bear's favorite honeypot on fire. Now, he sat amidst the smoking ruins, waiting for the inevitable reaction. Surely, now, Rome would stop holding committee meetings and start sharpening their gladius? News of Saguntum's fall hit Rome like a wet fish to the face. The Senate, previously occupied with important matters like whose turn is it to host the banquet, suddenly realized they had ghosted their ally into extinction. The guilt was palpable, but the outrage was louder. "How dare Hannibal destroy the city we ignored for 8 months?" they cried. "This is an insult to our honor." Rome decided to send one final embassy to Carthage. This wasn't a let's chat mission, this was an ultimatum. Leading the group was a senior Roman, a man with zero sense of humor, and a very large toga. They arrived in the Carthaginian Senate, which was packed with elders who were currently feeling pretty good about Hannibal's loot. The Roman ambassador didn't waste time with pleasantries. He stood in the center of the room, looking down his nose at everyone. "Hand over Hannibal," the Roman demanded. "He broke the treaty. Give him to us, and we won't burn your city down again." The Carthaginians, emboldened by the shiny gold cups currently on their desks, refused. They argued about river locations, treaty clauses, and whose map was more accurate. The Roman ambassador, realizing this was going nowhere, decided to drop the most dramatic mic in ancient history. He gathered the folds of his toga into a pouch at his chest. He looked at the Carthaginian council with eyes like lasers. In this fold, he boomed. "I carry peace and war. Which one do you want? Pick a card, any card." The Carthaginian Safete shouted back, "Give us whichever you like." The Roman smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I give you war." "We accept it," the Carthaginians roared back. And just like that, the Second Punic War began. Not with a surprise attack, but with a dramatic fashion statement. With the war officially declared, Hannibal stopped pretending to be a regular governor and went full Bond villain. He was still in New Carthage, sitting on his pile of Saguntine loot, planning the most insane logistical nightmare in history. Most generals would look at a map of Rome and think, "I'll build a boat." Hannibal looked at the map, saw the Alps' giant frozen mountains of death, and thought, "I bet elephants would love snow." Before he could leave, Hannibal had to secure his bases. He was playing 4D chess while Rome was still learning checkers. He sent 15,000 Spanish infantry to Africa to protect Carthage. Then, he brought 14,000 African troops to Spain to protect his base. It was a massive international exchange program, but with spears instead of foreign language credits. He also gave his army the winter off. He told them, "Go home, kiss your wives, pet your dogs, and eat some decent food, because come spring, we are going on a little hike." Hannibal also made a pilgrimage to the shrine of Melkart to pray for success. He needed all the divine help he could get. His plan relied on speed, surprise, and the assumption that the Romans were too arrogant to guard the back door. The stage was set. The army was rested. The elephants were, well, big. Hannibal stood on the coast of Spain, looking east. He wasn't just marching to fight an army. He was marching to dismantle a civilization. It was finally time to leave. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal gave the order to march. But before he could get to the main event in Italy, he had to cross the Ebro River. This was the geopolitical equivalent of crossing the yellow "Do Not Cross" tape at a crime scene while making eye contact with a police officer. Hannibal didn't just walk north, he bulldozed. The land between the Ebro and the Pyrenees Mountains was inhabited by fierce tribes like the Ilergetes and Bargusii, who hadn't received the memo that they were supposed to be conquered. Hannibal had to fight his way through them, treating the region like a violent warm-up session. It was a blitzkrieg. In just a few months, he smashed resistance, but it cost him men. To ensure the locals didn't stab him in the back the moment he left, he appointed his brother Hanno to govern the area. He left Hanno with 10,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 horsemen to keep the peace. Then, Hannibal did something strange. He looked at his massive army and realized some of the Spanish troops looked a bit wobbly. They were staring at the Pyrenees Mountains with the same enthusiasm one has for a root canal. Instead of forcing them to march, Hannibal dismissed them. He sent about 7,000 men home. "Go back to your families," he told them. It looked like an act of kindness, but it was actually a brilliant PR move. It made the remaining soldiers feel like elite volunteers, not prisoners. Plus, it saved on catering costs. With his army now leaner, meaner, and fully committed to the insanity ahead, Hannibal crossed the Pyrenees. He was no longer fighting for territory in Spain. He was hunting Rome. While Hannibal was treating the Pyrenees like a speed bump, Rome was finally waking up from its nap. The Senate, realizing that strongly worded letters weren't stopping the Carthaginians, decided to mobilize the legions. They tapped Consul Publius Cornelius Scipio for the job. His mission was simple: take a fleet, sail to Spain, and punch Hannibal in the nose before he could cause any real trouble. Scipio sailed to the friendly Greek port of Massilia, near the mouth of the Rhone River. His plan was to rest, resupply, and then leisurely march into Spain to intercept Hannibal. He assumed Hannibal was still stuck fighting tribes in the Pyrenees, probably bogged down in paperwork or mud. But Hannibal didn't do bogged down. Hannibal moved with the speed of a rumor in a high school cafeteria. While Scipio was unloading his luggage in Massilia, thinking he had plenty of time, Hannibal was already halfway through Gaul. He was negotiating with the local Celtic tribes, using a diplomatic technique called making it rain. Hannibal arrived at the Rhone River way ahead of schedule. Scipio's scouts, who were out looking for a slow-moving Carthaginian army in Spain, stumbled upon a massive dust cloud near the Rhone. They realized with horror that Hannibal wasn't in Spain. He was practically next door. The report went back to Scipio. Sir? You know that guy we're supposed to fight in Spain? He's currently asking for a ferry ticket across the Rhone." Scipio had completely miscalculated. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was a guy who showed up to a duel 3 days late, only to find out his opponent had already left to burn down his house. Scipio ordered his legions to drop everything and sprint to the Rhone. He was desperate to force a battle now. before Hannibal could get any closer to Italy. He marched his men hard, lungs burning, armor clanking, ready to save the Republic. They arrived at Hannibal's campsite exactly 3 days too late. The only things Hannibal had left behind were cold campfires and, metaphorically speaking, a sticky note on the fridge saying, "Catch me if you can." The Carthaginian army had already crossed the river and turned north, vanishing into the wilderness. Scipio was now faced with a dilemma. He had an army meant for Spain, but the enemy was heading for Italy. In a moment of strategic brilliance, or madness, he decided to split the difference. He sent the bulk of his army to Spain under his brother, Gnaeus Scipio, to beat up Hannibal's supply lines. Meanwhile, Papa Scipio himself hopped on a boat and sailed back to Italy to raise a defense force. He assumed he had plenty of time. After all, to get to Italy, Hannibal would have to cross the Alps in late autumn. And nobody was crazy enough to do that. The Alps were a frozen death trap inhabited by yetis and avalanches. Back in the ruins of Saguntum, the smoke had finally cleared. The city was gone, but its destruction had achieved exactly what Hannibal wanted. The peace was broken. The legions were scattered. The Roman ego was bruised. The Siege of Saguntum wasn't just a battle. It was the opening credits to the most epic disaster movie Rome would ever survive. Hannibal turned his elephants toward the snow-capped peaks, took a deep breath of freezing air, and stepped into legend.